2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing his gospel and truth and his sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Quanah Watt come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Lord will, it is edifying. Lord will, it is straight to the point. And I had come across this article, which this is it's called the Smart News app. And if you haven't, right, I would go and download the Newsbreak app and the Smart News app, right? Both of those apps will definitely keep you updated on what's going on locally, as well as like major news and what like that that are going on globally. I would again suggest go and download both of those apps, the Newsbreak app as well as the Smart News app. But nonetheless, this article right here popped up on my phone right as a notification. And this is heavy, man, because again, we are definitely in the time of Jacob's trouble, but it's going to only get worse from here, right? We understand that Esau, Edom, right, really Trump and his administration are really focused, right, on coming after you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, even though, right, you had all these different nations, right, come across the border when Trump was, or it's like when Biden was in office. They had the border open. You had so-called so-called Africans, which we know called Hamites, so-called Chinese, which called Moabites, the so-called Arabs, right, which are the Ishmaelites, and so on and so forth. All these different nations, right, coming across the border into America, right, freely, right. They just ultimately allowed them, right, to come through, and who are they focused on, right, as claiming that a certain people are bringing crime and drugs over to America. It's the Israelites, right? The so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. Those are the ones, right, who Esau are, looking at and accusing, right, of, all creating and doing all these different things, evil and wicked and bad things. It's the Israelites, man. And again, right, as we see this, right, Esau, as it says right here in the article, Trump's ICE is quietly stockpiling weaponry, and it should alarm us all, right? They're stockpiling weapons, How that corn man ultimately passed. But nonetheless, right, they're stockpiling weapons, man, right? And what is it for? It's for when Esau ultimately declares martial law, right, or the Insurrection Act, and ultimately comes down having great wrath, And I'll read a few of these paragraphs. It's a pretty long article. You can go and look it up for yourself, man, and we'll go from there. But it says the forever wars abroad and the global war on terror after the September 11 attacks left behind a long trail of failure, disillusionment, and death. But they also funneled huge sums of taxpayer money to companies that supplied the equipment that made all that destruction possible, right? The result in windfalls for GOP-connected companies and fueled a massive public-private bureaucracy that grew harder to rein in as it metastasized to monstrous proportions, right? It says something like this is happening again in a different theater of operations. Right, Donald Trump's campaign of violent mass deportations. It's becoming its own forever war. It could drag on for years or decades without success. It's producing misguided, which Esau's not going to allow it to drag on that long, right? Revelations 12 and 12, it says what? You're going to come down having great wrath because he knows he has but a short time. It's not going to go on for years and decades, man. No. Esau is going to try to rein it in, right? His NWO rein it in, Lord will, right? Within the next, by the end of this year or within the next year or two, man. It says it's producing misguided military occupations of restive local populations. It has launched a huge arms buildup, and it also has what might be termed its very own war profiteers, which are people who ultimately profit off of these different wars, that are ultimately, set up, right? Because a lot of these wars are just set up, Esau's got his, his CIA and stuff like that, which, they go into these different countries and they create that turmoil, right? So that they can do what? A coup d'etat, right? Overthrow that current government so that they can set up their own, government, or a government that is, beneficial to them, and they take the resources and so on and so forth. And, Esau is known for doing that shit, man. Because Esau ultimately profits off of them, right? You had one of the Rockefellers, if I'm not mistaken, right? It could have been one of the Rothschilds, but ultimately made a statement and said that, they're not going to let a good crisis go to waste, So they're going to utilize it, man, right? Especially if it means making money off of those situations, So let's drop down a little bit. It says, a harrowing glimpse of this future lies in a new report by Schiff that has gotten surprisingly little notice. It finds that Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection have formally approved contracts for at least a whopping $144 million in weapons. And call Allah Yahweh Shemel Shah, that's spiritual, man. It says ammunition and other accessories during Trump's first year, right? $144 million, of weapons and ammunition just in the first year of Trump's administration, man. Which is, that's a lot of money, It says the analysis based on government contracting data documents at least a 4-fold increase for ICE and a doubling for CPB relative to 2024, concluding that this will build a heavily armed domestic police force, and this is what they want, right? They want to ultimately Trump. It goes back to that statement that he made when he went down there to El Salvador. Right now, it's time to come after the homeborn. Right, when he was deporting, a lot of these, immigrants that came over. What did he say? He said, "Now I got to come after the homeborn." Right, those are born here. Which we understand. 2 Corinthians 2:11. Right, we're not getting into ignorance of Satan's devices, his evil intent, and his purpose. We understand what he meant by that. We understand that he's talking about those who have, have been here, right? Whether they've been here for generations or they're the, first generation born here, or however it may be, right? Because we understand that he was trying to and has been trying to get rid of, the 14th Amendment, right? Which is a natural born citizenship, as well as habeas corpus, So all of these different things Esau's doing so that way he can come after who? The Israelites, right? Because that's who he's making war against, right? Pursuant to Revelations 12 and 17, right? It says his eyes opening. It's eye-opening stuff. One ICE contract is with Giselle Automatics for millions of dollars worth of precision long guns and accessories to support armed agents and other ICE operations, Schiff's report says. This involves an unknown number of Giselle Border Patrol rifles. The report notes describing this weapon as an AR-style rifle with military specifications. CPB contracted for millions of dollars more in rifles as well. ICE and BPE also contracted with Glock for millions of dollars in handguns and accessories, the report says. Taking all these contracts together, the report starkly concludes ICE and BPE have together placed orders to purchase thousands of new high-powered lethal weapons at taxpayer expense. Right, so they're ready to go. Right, they're ready. They're purchasing these weapons, and again, it's not for no reason. Right, Ecclesiastes. Matter of fact, let's grab it. Ecclesiastes, chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Right. It says, dropping down to verse 8. It says, "A time to love, and a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace." And we're not in the time of peace. Right, we're in the time of war, as you've seen in that video right, with that so-called black woman, ultimately stating, right, that everybody's saying that they want a civil war, right, that they feel that people, that there's going to be a civil war, right, that's about to happen, and you best believe something like that is going to happen, man, right, which is according to the scriptures, right, Isaiah 19:2, right, Egyptian versus Egyptian, right. So we're in the time of war, man. For sure we're in the time of war, and it's going to pop off here soon, man, right? It says there's still more. The report documents ICE and BPE, or CPB, I keep saying BPE, CBP contracts totaling more than $30 million in ammunition and more than $25 million in contracts for the non-lethal weapons. That's not a reassuring description. They include tasers, pepper spray, and tear gas canisters. In short, we're looking at a massive stockpiling of weapons that will be in ICE's and CBP's possession for years to come, and someone is supplying all that equipment. And we understand, right, what's going on and what's taking place through the spirit, man. Esau is getting ready, to come down having great wrath. Let's go ahead and jump to this 2 Esdras 16. Right, because this is in the scriptures, right? Him, ultimately doing this, right, is in the scriptures, right? This is 2 Esdras 16, verse 68. It says, "For behold, the burning wrath of a great multitude is kindled over you, and they shall take away certain of you and feed you, being idle with things offered unto idols," right? Right, being thrown into these FEMA camps, isolation facilities, detention centers, As we see ICE, here in Arizona, right, in Surprise, Arizona, they purchased a 400,000 square foot, warehouse, right, that they're turning into a detention center, man, as well as all over, right. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars purchasing these abandoned warehouses or newly built but not yet occupied, warehouses, right, and then turning them again into detention facilities, man. And you can look this up, right? This is happening all over the United States, right? Esau is ready, right? Especially these fucking goddamn Edomites, man. They're ready, right? They're ready, right? They got these weapons, and they're using them already, but they're gonna use them a hell of a lot more in the days to come, It says, "And they that consent unto them shall be had in derision and reproach and trodden underfoot," right? Because Esau don't care. Even if you try to, get with his program, if you're not part of, that 500 million, right, which is according to his Georgia Guidestones, if he wants the world population to 500 million or less, if you're not part of that number, Esau gonna get rid of you anyways, man. Which is why, the prophets, the true prophets, Yahweh Shem Shai, telling you, hey, do not take the charagma, man, right? Esau's not telling you that you Israelites are now part of his NWO. That he wants to get rid of you Israelites. Period. Right? He wants to get rid of you Israelites, man. That perpetual hatred, right? So what is that? When Ezekiel 35 verse 5, right? He hates the Israelites. The so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right? He hates y'all, man. So he's trying to get rid of y'all, right? So even if you do take the charagma, right, he might just kill your ass. And what's even worse is that the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, right, through his only beloved begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, is going to destroy you for it. And there's no repenting from it. There's nothing that you can do. You will be destroyed. So even if Esau leaves you alone, the Lord's still going to destroy you. But continuing on, it being the point, verse 70, it says, "For there shall be in every place and in the next cities a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord," right? Which you have the Insurrection Act, which Trump, had talked about, enacting, right? The Insurrection Act, right? Which is, very close, to martial law, right? Ultimately a step prior, to enacting martial law, And that's coming soon, right? You had J.D. Vance basically make the statement that, he wants, these ICE agents to go from door to door, This is going to happen real soon, man, right? It says, verse 71, it says, "They shall be like madmen, sparing none, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord," right? Sparing none, right? Esau is always, right, since the very beginning, right? He's been, he don't spare old, young. It don't matter, right? We've seen that also when it was in Chicago. So like, let me roll this window up. This so-called fucking the nigga woman over here running her fucking mouth. But we've seen that with Chicago, right? When those 300 agents came, to that apartment complex and raided the apartment complex, pulled everyone out, including the kids, zip tied the hands of the kids behind their back, and they had no clothes on, and everybody was asleep. They did it in the middle of the fucking night, right? You still don't give a shit, man. You even had some of the ICE agents basically in front of the adults saying, F them kids, They don't care, man. And this is how they are, and it's going to be even worse in the times to come, right? And again, who's the main target? You Israelites, man. You so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right? And really mainly, right, those who preach against his damn devil and his system, right? Us, Esau gonna come after us, man. It's not just gonna be regular Israelites in those facilities, right? Or these camps. It's gonna be, those who are preaching Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua, preaching this gospel in truth and in sincerity, which is what? That persecution, But continuing on, verse 72, it said, for they shall waste and take away their goods and cast them out of their houses. Then shall they be known who are my chosen, and they shall be tried as gold in the fire. That's right. This is what's coming, man. But see, we have nothing to worry about, because Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua is going to, he's going to have our back. The Lord is going to protect us in those days when our enemy, come in like a flood. The Lord's going to lift up that standard against him. Let's grab that. This is Isaiah chapter 59 and verse 19. It says, so shall they fear the name of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, when the enemy shall come in like a flood, right? The spirit of the Lord Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua shall lift up a standard against him, right? We understand that the Lord has done this many times, for us, man. Enemy coming like a flood, meaning, King David said, my enemy was too strong for me, meaning his enemy was, greater than he was, stronger than he was. And we see these damn devils and the technology that they have, these different drones, these drone dogs, these robots that are, they got out here doing, acrobatics and so on and so forth, Esau has all this technology, man. So we need Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushua to come through for us. We have no other choice, man. We're not going to be able to do it ourselves. Let me give this account. The 2 Maccabees chapter 11 and verse 1. And I'll start at the top. Right? It says, not long after Lysias, the king's protector and cousin, who also managed the affairs, took sore displeasure for the things that were done. And when he had gathered about 80,000, which is 80,000, with all the horsemen, he came against the Jews, thinking to make the city an habitation of the Gentiles, and to make gain of the temple as of the other chapels of the heathen, and to set the high priesthood to sale every year, which is what Esau has done, right? Many times throughout history, where you read in 1 Maccabees, the 1st chapter, polluting the temple, right? Stealing the vessels dedicated unto the Lord, right? The gold, the silver, the incense, so on and so forth, right? And to set up, a false god in the temple, right? As well as, false prophets and, so on and so forth, man. This is what Esau has done, and this is what he plans to do as well, man. Esau wants to replace the prophets, and this truth, right, with his own, his own Bible, if you will, his own religion, right, and his own oracles, his own prophets, right, through AI and this technology, that he got, Esau wants to establish all that through the left-hand side, But we'll continue on. Verse 4 says, not at all considering the power of the Most High, but puffed up with his 10,000s of footmen and his thousands of horsemen and his 80 elephants, right? So we have beasts, right? Not considering the power of the Most High, man, which is what Esau's not doing that. But ultimately we understand this is the Lord doing it, right? What is that? Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, and he turn it whithersoever he will, right? The Lord is ultimately puffing this devil up, just as he did Pharaoh, right? To show his great power, right? He ultimately hardened his neck, and this is what the Lord's doing to Esau, Edom today, right? Hardening his neck, allowing him to be proud, so that the Lord can bring him down hard, right? Verse 5, it says, so he came to Judea and drew near to Bethsura, which was a strong town, but distant from Jerusalem about 5 furlongs, and he laid sore siege unto it. Now when they that were with Maccabeus heard that he besieged the holds, they and all the people with lamentation and tears besought the Lord that he would send a good angel to deliver them. And this is what we doing, man, right? When trouble arises, we pray to the Lord. We cry unto the Lord, And brothers have testimonies, right, of crying unto the Lord in the time of trouble, and the Lord hearing us and delivering us out of that trouble, right? And this is exactly what happened. Verse 7, it says, then Maccabeus himself first of all took weapons, exhorting the others that they would jeopard themselves together with him to help their brethren. So they went forth together with a willing mind. And as they were at Jerusalem, there appeared before them on horseback one in white clothing, shaking his armor of gold. So you had an angel, right? You had an angel, show up, man. It says, then they praised the merciful power altogether and took heart, insomuch that they were ready not only to fight with men, but with most cruel beasts, and to pierce through walls of iron. And imagine that, right? You praying to the Lord. You looking out to the distance, and you're seeing an army, 80,000 strong, right? You can see them as far as the eye can see, a lot, 80,000, right? Standing in the field, coming after you, And again, we're talking about ancient times. Nowadays, these wars are fought with technology and whatnot. But we're talking about ancient times. Imagine 80,000 people with swords, spears, horses, elephants, so on and so forth. All these different weapons, right, coming to kill you, and you praying to the Lord that he ultimately sent a good angel to to deliver you, right, to help you, And as you're going out to the battle, right, you're courageous, you're brave, you're confident, you trust in the Lord that he'll hear your prayers. And as you're going out there, the Lord sends an angel. And this angel very well, it doesn't, describe the angel, right, in that kind of way. And the angel could have been 10, 12 feet tall, right? Huge ass fucking horse, bigger than a Clydesdale, trodden out there with these big ass fucking weapons, man, ready to fucking fight with you, Imagine that. Imagine the confidence and the faith, right, that you would have seeing that, knowing that the Lord sent an angel to help you. Verse 10, it says, thus they marched forward in their armor, having an helper from heaven, for the Lord was merciful unto them, right? The Lord sent them help, right? It says, in giving a charge upon their enemies like lions, they slew 11,000 footmen and 1,600 horsemen, and put all the other to flight, man. Right? Lord raising up that standard against our enemies for us. Right? This is an example of that. Right? It says, many of them also being wounded escaped naked. Right? And Lysias himself fled away shamefully and so escaped. Who, as he was a man of understanding, casting with himself what loss he had, and considered that the Hebrews could not be overcome, because the almighty power helped them. Right? Our strength, our victory cometh from Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua. Right? Judas Maccabeus, right? He ultimately stated that in 1 Maccabees 3 and verse 19. It says, right. This is First Maccabees 3 and 17. It says, who, when they saw the host coming to meet them, said unto Judas, how shall we be able to fight, being so few, to fight against so great a multitude and so strong? seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all this day? Unto whom Judas answered, it is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few, and with the Most High and with the power of heaven, it is all one, to deliver with a great multitude or a small company. Right? So he's acknowledging the power of the Lord unto them. Right? Saying that this isn't hard for the Lord. Right? For with the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahshua, nothing is impossible. You know? And he's ultimately reiterating this to the men. You know? It says, verse 19, it says, for the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of an host, right? We just read, right? When Lysias was coming up with 80,000, right? They didn't have 80,000, but the Lord sent them help and they were able to overcome, right? It says, for the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of an host, but strength cometh from heaven. They come against us in much pride and iniquity to destroy us and our wives and our children, and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws, right? Just as we do today, man. Wherefore the Lord himself will overthrow them before our face. And as for you, be ye not afraid of them, right? It says, now as soon as he had left off speaking, he leapt suddenly upon them. And so Saran and his host was overthrown before them. That's right, man. So they overcame, right, their enemies through Yahweh B'Shem Yahshua. And again, Lord, will we be part of the elect? This is exactly what's going to happen for us, right? Esau going to come in like a flood, right? And utilize these different weapons and technology that he's got stockpiled waiting, you know? But the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahshua is going to allow us to overcome, allow us to defeat this damn devil, man, right? However that may look, right? Whether it be, you know, Lord sending an angel or the Lord giving us spiritual power to fight ourselves, man, you know? Either way, the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahshua is going to be there with us, man. You know? And fight with us. You know? This is something that we have to look forward to and something we have to continue to meditate on, you know, continually. Let me highlight this. I thought I had it highlighted, but Salakia, you know? This is something we have to continue to meditate upon every single day, right? Understanding that Yahweh B'Shem Yahshua is in charge, not this damn devil, man. You know? And soon he's going to be taken out the way, right? Soon he's going to lose, right? And we're going to win. We're going to get the victory. All we got to do is continue to remain faithful, right? We're at the end, right? There's nothing else left for us to do except to maintain in the faith. You know, continue to pray, continue to, you know, to read as much as possible, right? Stay in the spirit as much as possible, right? And maintain, you know, maintain in the spirit to the best of your ability, man. And continue to fight, you know, so that the Lord can fight for us, you know. So with that, Lord wills that I find, Lord will straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, B'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, B'Hashem, Rechak, Kodash, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.